Hey everyone, welcome back for another deep dive. You're ready to explore the world of little minds.
Always fascinating.
I think so too. Today we're cracking open Child and Youth Psychology, Volume 1.
Oh, excellent choice.
Yeah, it's this really cool textbook from First Europe Education.
Mm,
It's like a crash course on all things kids, from
yeah.
their first steps to those why questions they never stop asking.
I think people will be surprised just how much is happening in those little brains, like even before they can say a single word.
You're right, it's incredible. We always say kids are like sponges soaking up everything around them. And
Exactly.
this book breaks it all down, like the how and the why of it all.
Well, it really is like getting a peek behind the curtain. Right.
Yeah, totally. And trust me, folks, it's a wild ride.
Wild and wonderful, I'd say.
Okay, so let's start at the very beginning. Life in the womb.
Yes.
What's going on in those tiny brains before they even enter the world?
Well, a lot, actually. The textbook highlights how fetuses can already sense light and dark in there, react to sounds.
Wow.
Really?
Oh, yeah, and even develop a preference for their mother's voice.
That's like they're already getting ready for the outside world.
Exactly. Tuning in, preparing, and then right after birth, boom, they can recognize their mother's scent too, which is so important for that early bond.
It's amazing how nature just sets it all up, right?
Amazing. Those instincts are powerful. And then as they start exploring this new world,
Mm.
all those reflexes, like sucking and
Yeah.
grasping, they're not just cute, they're crucial.
I used to think those reflexes were just adorable baby things.
Yeah,
But the book explains how they're like the building blocks for later skills.
totally. It's how they make sense of things, how they start interacting with the world.
I see. So, like, that grasping reflex eventually turns into being able to hold things.
Right. And then there's that sucking reflex. Well, that one's pretty important for obviously.
Arousing. Yeah.
Exactly. And then, of course, there's that whole progression we all go through,
Yeah.
from those first wobbly head movements to rolling over to crawling, and finally those first steps.
What a journey. It is. And it's not just about the big milestones. The book gets into those fine motor skills, too, those really precise movements.
Oh, right, like picking up small things.
Exactly, or scribbling with crayons, buttoning their own clothes. All those little things that take so much coordination.
I remember watching my niece struggle with buttons. It's harder than it looks.
It is, and it all takes time and practice.
Now, something I found interesting was this emphasis on a moderately stimulating environment.
Yes.
What does that even mean for a baby?
Well, this is where nature and nurture really come together. We've got those innate reflexes and predispositions, but the environment shapes how they all play out.
Makes sense.
A moderately stimulating environment is all about providing opportunities, for exploration and interaction, but not overwhelming them with too much.
So finding that sweet spot.
Exactly. Enough to spark their senses, to encourage them,
Yeah.
but not so much that it becomes too much to handle.
Like those play gyms with all the hanging toys.
Yeah, exactly. Play gyms, tummy time, interacting with caregivers through songs and games.
Got it.
All those things are great ways to provide that perfect level of stimulation, and it really does make a difference.
Okay, so we've covered those physical milestones, but as babies grow, they start, well, talking back. So how do we go from those adorable coos and babbles to actual words?
It's a fascinating process. The textbook walks us through the stages of language development, starting with the pre-linguistic ones, crying, cooing, babbling. Those are crucial for what comes later, actually.
It's like they're testing out their voices.
They are, practicing those sounds, figuring out how to get our attention.
And then those first words pop out.
Yes. And it's not just about saying the words, it's about connecting them to meanings, using them to communicate.
That's true. I remember when my nephew would say, "Mama," and it could mean so many different things.
Exactly. Mama could mean I'm hungry, or I need you, or look at me, all at the same time.
It's like those single words are packed with information.
They are. And then, bit by bit, those one-word sentences grow. Two-word combos, then phrases, and eventually full-blown sentences.
Wow.
But here's the thing. Even when they're mastering those more complex sentences, some structures take longer.
Like what?
We'll take the passive voice. We use it all the time as adults, but kids don't really get it until around 7 years old.
Oh, interesting.
So your child might have a great vocabulary, but they might struggle with sentences like, the ball was thrown by John.
I never thought about that.
Their brains are still developing the wiring for that kind of grammar.
That makes sense. So it's a gradual process with layers of complexity building up over time.
Exactly. And of course, the environment plays a huge role too. The language they hear, the interactions they have, even the books they're exposed to, all of it shapes how they learn to speak.
So reading to kids isn't just about bonding time. It's actually helping their brains develop.
Absolutely. And this is where that whole debate about bilingualism comes in. There's a myth that exposing kids to two languages will confuse them or slow them down.
Right, I've heard that.
But actually, the research says the opposite is true.
Really? So being bilingual is a good thing.
It seems that way. Learning two languages early on can actually boost their cognitive flexibility, their problem solving, even their ability to focus.
Wow, that's amazing.
It is. It shows how powerful those early experiences can be. They really shape those neural pathways in the brain.
Speaking of shaping neural pathways, how do those little brains go from, putting everything in their mouths to actually thinking and problem solving?
Well, that's where Piaget comes in. The textbook takes a deep dive into his stages of cognitive development. It's a great framework for understanding how kids' thinking evolves over time.
Right. Piaget, I remember learning about him in college. It's been a while, though. Can you remind me of those stages?
Sure. So Piaget proposed four main stages: sensorimotor, pre-operational, concrete operational, and formal operational.
Okay, that's coming back to me a little bit.
Great. So the sensorimotor stage is first. It runs roughly from birth to 2 years old, and it's all about learning through the senses and actions.
So those babies who put everything in their mouths.
Exactly. They're exploring the world through taste and touch. They're like little scientists conducting experiments.
I love that analogy. Little scientists. That's perfect.
Right. And then, around 2 years old, they move into the pre-operational stage. That's where symbolic thinking starts to develop, using words and images to represent ideas.
That's when we see that explosion of pretend play. Right.
You got it. They're building worlds in their minds. But they're still pretty egocentric at this stage.
Egocentric meaning.
They have trouble seeing things from another person's point of view. It's all about them.
Which probably explains those epic meltdowns when they don't get their way.
Precisely. Another key thing at this stage is they haven't grasped the concept of conservation yet.
Oh, right. That's like the classic experiment with the different shaped glasses.
Exactly. You can pour the same amount of liquid into a tall, skinny glass and a short, wide one, and they'll insist the tall one has more.
Just because it looks that way.
Yep. They're focused on appearances. They haven't developed the logic to understand that the amount stays the same.
So when do they finally figure out that things can change appearance without actually changing?
Well, around age 7, they enter the concrete operational stage. This is where their thinking becomes more logical.
Okay.
They start to understand conservation, they can classify objects, they can even do basic math.
It sounds like they're becoming more grounded in reality.
Exactly. But they still need concrete examples. They can't think abstractly yet.
I see. And what about that final stage, formal operational?
That one typically kicks in around adolescence and continues into adulthood. That's when they develop the ability to think abstractly, reason hypothetically, and consider multiple perspectives.
Wow, so it's like their brains are reaching full capacity.
Pretty much. They can tackle those big, complex questions about the world and their place in it.
It's a long journey to get there.
It is. But it's important to remember that Piaget stages are a guide, not a strict rule book.
Right. Every child develops at their own pace.
Exactly. Observation and interaction are key to understanding each child's individual journey. There's no substitute for that.
Okay, so we've covered physical development, language, and now how they think.
It's like we're building a whole human being here, piece by piece.
Yeah, so what's next on our deep dive? Where do we go from here?
Well, as their cognitive abilities grow, they're also stepping into the world of social interactions. And that, as we all know, can be quite a ride.
Yes. Those early friendships, the dynamics of the classroom.
Hmm?
So much to explore there. I'm really interested to hear what the textbook have to say about that whole social development piece.
Me too. It's one of my favorite areas to delve into. So buckle up. I think you'll find this next part fascinating. It really is amazing to think about how those early interactions set the stage for everything that comes later. You know, how friendships grow from just playing together to something deeper.
Deeper how?
The book talks about how those friendships become based on things like shared interests and trust.
Right, they start to really understand those concepts.
Exactly. And they learn how to support each other. All those things are so important for navigating the classroom, which is a whole new social scene, really.
It's like their first experience with a mini society.
It is. Think about it. There's a hierarchy, there are different social groups, all those unspoken rules.
Oh yeah. Even as a kid, I was fascinated by that, trying to figure out who was popular, who the rebels were.
It's all there, and the textbook digs into those different social groups that pop up in the classroom, from those tight-knit cliques to those looser networks of friends. And it also looks at the teacher's role, in creating a good environment.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, a good teacher can make such a difference in setting the tone, making sure everyone feels included and respected. It's about fostering that positive social climate.
I see what you mean. And speaking of fostering things, what about imagination?
Ah, imagination.
It feels like such a core part of childhood, creating those worlds in their minds, turning ordinary objects into something magical.
I know. I wish I could tap back into that sometimes.
Me too. It's like they see the world with such possibility and wonder.
They do. And the textbook really emphasizes how important that is, not as the opposite of reason, but actually as something that supports development, cognitive development, emotional regulation, even social skills.
Really? So imagination actually helps with all of that.
It does. For one thing, pretend play lets them practice problem solving, try out different perspectives, experiment with
It's
roles.
like they're running simulations in their heads.
Exactly. And it's all in a safe environment so they can explore those things without real-world consequences. Plus, imagination helps with regulating emotions. The book points out that kids use it to process tough feelings, cope with stress, even work through trauma.
That makes sense. I used to use my stuffed animals to talk through things when I was little.
Exactly. It's a safe outlet. And don't forget, imagination can foster empathy too.
Empathy. How so?
When they're pretending, they're often taking on different characters, right?
Right.
Well, that forces them to step outside of their own perspective and think about what someone else is thinking or feeling.
Oh, that's a good point.
It's like a crash course in empathy, all through play. Which brings us to the different stages of play that the textbook covers, from those early explorations with objects to the world of pretend.
Ooh, break that down for me. What are those stages?
Okay, so it starts with unoccupied play, which is just random movements, really. Then there's solitary play, where they're doing their own thing, even if there are other kids around.
Like when my nephew is totally absorbed in building his block tower and doesn't even notice anyone else.
Exactly. Then, as their social skills develop, they move into onlooker play, where they watch others play but don't join in.
Like they're scoping things out.
Exactly, taking it all in. Then comes parallel play, where they're playing next to each other, doing similar activities but not really interacting directly.
So like building their own towers but using the same set of blocks.
Exactly. And finally, there's associative play and cooperative play, where they start to truly interact, share, collaborate, and create those elaborate pretend scenarios together.
So it's a gradual shift from solo play to those shared experiences.
It is. And it's important to give them opportunities for all types of play because each one contributes to their growth in different ways.
This all makes me think about that transition from preschool to a more structured school setting.
Huh.
How do they handle that shift from play-based learning to academics?
That's a big one. The textbook dives into some of the key factors at play there. Things like their inherent abilities, what we sometimes call giftedness, motivation, environment, and even creativity.
So many different pieces of the puzzle.
Yeah.
But what about kids who struggle in school? Not every child is going to excel academically, right?
Of course not. And the book acknowledges that there are different reasons why some kids might have a harder time. Some might have learning disabilities, like dyslexia, which affects reading and writing. Others might have trouble focusing or processing information in certain ways.
And it's so crucial to identify those challenges early on so they can get the support they need.
Absolutely. Early intervention can make all the difference. The book stresses working closely with parents, teachers, and specialists to create individual plans that address each child's unique needs.
It's like creating a personalized map for success. But what about those kids who do excel? What sets them apart?
Well, the book points out that giftedness is a complex thing, It's not just one thing. Some kids excel in specific subjects like math or language, while others might be incredibly artistic or creative. It's about recognizing those strengths and nurturing them.
I like that. It's not just about being book smart. It's about recognizing all those different talents.
Exactly. And the textbook emphasizes the role of motivation and a supportive environment in helping kids succeed. When they feel engaged and curious and supported, they're more likely to thrive.
It's about sparking that love of learning, that intrinsic motivation to learn and grow.
It is. And speaking of learning, this whole discussion makes me think about metacognition.
Metacognition, what's that?
It's basically thinking about thinking.
Well,
It's being aware of your own learning process, knowing your strengths and weaknesses, and developing strategies that help you learn better.
so like becoming the master of your own mind.
Exactly. And the book explains that it's something that develops over time. Young kids might not be aware of how they learn, but as they mature, they start to get it. They develop that self-awareness and learn to take control of their own learning journey.
They become more intentional.
Exactly. And those metacognitive skills can really make a difference in their success. It lets them identify challenges, seek help when they need it, and use strategies that work best for them.
Wow, so metacognition really is a superpower.
It is. And this brings us to another fascinating area: personality development. As kids grow and learn, their unique personalities start to shine through. How does the textbook approach this?
It's true. Those personalities really emerge as they become more independent.
They do. And the textbook talks about how that gradual process of detaching from their primary caregiver, that drive for independence, is a big part of it. A child's sense of competence also comes into play here.
Meaning,
Well, the book talks about learned helplessness. That's what can happen when kids feel like they don't have any control over their environment.
so if they keep feeling like they're failing, they might start to believe they can't succeed, even if they can.
Yes, and that can have a ripple effect.
Hmm.
The book also gets into the interplay of genes and environment in shaping personality and this idea of evocative context.
Evocative context, what's that?
It's the idea that a child's inherent traits can actually trigger certain responses from others.
So like a really outgoing child might get more social interaction, which makes them even more outgoing.
Exactly. It's a back and forth, this dance between nature and nurture. And speaking of dynamics, let's talk about how those little ones navigate the world of emotions and behavior, because let's face it, those emotions can be intense, and those behaviors, sometimes, well, challenging is an understatement.
Oh, tell me about it. Every parent can relate to that. So what insights does the textbook offer on those tricky behaviors?
Well, it actually offers some really insightful explanations rooted in child development theory. It's not just about kids being bad, it's about understanding what's going on beneath the surface.
I like that approach.
Yeah.
So where do we start? What's a common challenge?
Well, let's start with attention seeking. Think about all the ways kids try to get noticed, being the perfect child, clowning around, even rebelling.
Oh yeah, they've got a whole toolbox of tricks, don't they?
They do, and the book suggests that instead of getting caught in those power struggles, parents can try to figure out what's motivating the behavior.
So instead of just reacting, we try to understand why they're doing what they're doing.
Exactly. It could be they're craving attention, validation, connection. And those are all legitimate needs. They just need to find better ways to express them.
Right. It's about teaching them those alternative strategies. And what about aggression? That's a big one for a lot of parents.
It is, and the book looks at the role of frustration, imitation, and inconsistent parenting in those aggressive behaviors. It's not just about the child. It's about those factors that might be contributing.
That makes a lot of sense. It's about the whole picture.
Exactly. It's about creating that safe, nurturing environment where they feel understood. And instead of punishment, the book focuses on using logical consequences and understanding their needs. It's about guiding them towards more positive ways of interacting with the world. And as we're talking about interacting, I can't help but think about the family system, the bigger context.
Right. Families are like their own little ecosystems.
They are. And the textbook really emphasizes how that family structure and the overall atmosphere can impact a child's well-being. It talks about the challenges of divorce, unemployment, blended families. All those things can create stress.
Stress that can affect them emotionally and academically.
Exactly. But the book also emphasizes resilience. Kids are amazingly resilient.
That's true. They can bounce back from so much.
They can. And even in those tough situations, a positive family climate can make a huge difference. It's about maintaining that support system. And of course, within the family, there's the whole sibling dynamic.
Oh, sibling relationships, the good, the bad, and the ugly.
Exactly. They can be so complex. The book dives into that, including the whole birth order thing.
Oh, that's a whole other discussion.
It is. The book cautions against those sweeping generalizations about birth order.
Right, because it's more nuanced than that.
Exactly. It's about how parents can create that sense of fairness and belonging for each child, no matter where they fall in the family.
Love that. Creating that balance so everyone feels valued. Okay, so we've talked about challenges, family dynamics.
Hmm.
What about raising resilient kids?
Yes.
Yeah,
That's the ultimate goal, isn't it? Equipping them to face whatever comes their way.
totally. Resilience is like giving them armor for life.
It is. The book emphasizes things like setting clear boundaries, supporting them without overprotecting, fostering that love of learning, and encouraging responsibility. It's about empowering them to be independent and capable. And the book ends on a really reassuring note.
What's that?
It reminds us that parenting isn't about being perfect. It's about unconditional love and acceptance, even when things get messy. We're all learning and growing together.
I love that. It takes the pressure off, doesn't it?
It does. So as we wrap up this deep dive into child and youth psychology, Volume 1, I'm just struck by how much there is to learn about this field. It's so rich and complex.
Me too. Feels like we've just scratched the surface, but I've learned so much already.
Me too. And before we sign off, I want to leave you with a thought. While this textbook gives us a great overview, the research is always changing.
That's true. There's always something new to discover.
There is. And one area that's really interesting right now is the impact of technology on child development. It's such a big part of their lives now.
It is. They're growing up in a digital world.
They are. And the research is exploring both the good and the bad, the potential and the risks. Technology can offer amazing educational resources. It can connect them with others, even spark creativity. But there are also concerns about screen time, cyberbullying, and the impact on their attention spans and social skills.
It's like a double-edged sword.
It is. And the question becomes, how do we strike that balance? How do we harness the power of technology while protecting them from the potential downsides?
That's the million-dollar question for sure.
It is. It's something we all need to be thinking about. So much to unpack.
It is. We've covered so much ground from those early moments in the womb all the way to those more complex skills they develop as they grow up. It's fascinating.
It really is. What stands out to me is how much potential for growth each child has. It's incredible. They're constantly changing, learning, adapting.
You're right. It's like they never stop. And I guess it's on us
Yeah.
as parents and educators to make sure they have the right environment to do all that growing and thriving.
Couldn't agree more. Give them those opportunities, to explore, discover, and just be curious. That's what the textbook really emphasizes, fostering that love of learning.
And that's what will stay with them, right? That curiosity.
It is. It's about creating those environments where they feel safe to experiment, to ask those why questions, all those things that keep them engaged.
Makes me think about different learning styles, though. Because not every child learns the same way, right?
Absolutely. The textbook touches on that a bit. Some kids are visual learners, some are auditory, some learn best by doing.
Right. Hands-on learning.
Exactly. Understanding those different styles can help us as parents and educators tailor our approach, make it more engaging for each individual child.
It's about finding what clicks for each kid. No more one-size-fits-all approach to education.
Exactly. And that brings us to another key ingredient, creativity. The textbook stresses how vital it is to nurture that in children. Encourage them to think outside the box, to try new things, to express themselves in their own unique ways.
Because those are the skills they'll need to solve problems,
Yeah.
come up with new ideas, really, for just about anything they want to do in life.
Exactly. Creativity isn't just about art. It's a way of thinking, a way of approaching the world. It's about being adaptable, resourceful, finding those solutions.
Love it. Okay, so as we wrap up our deep dive into Child and Youth Psychology, Volume 1, I'm just feeling, well, kind of overwhelmed, honestly. There's just so much to learn about these little humans.
I know what you mean. It feels like we've just dipped our toes in the water, but in the best way possible.
Right. It's given us this new perspective, this new understanding of how their minds work, how they develop, all of it. So to our listeners, if you're feeling as intrigued as we are, I definitely recommend checking out this textbook from First Europe Education. It's amazing.
It really is a great resource.
Yeah.
And as we all continue on this journey, whether we're parents, educators, or just fascinated by kids, let's remember to really cherish those everyday moments.
Yes. Those little milestones, those challenges, even those moments that make you scratch your head and wonder what they're thinking.
Exactly. Every stage is so unique and special. So let's embrace it all, keep those minds engaged, and never stop learning and growing right alongside them.
Beautifully said. And that's a wrap on this deep dive. Until next time, keep those curious minds exploring. And remember, every child is full of potential just waiting to blossom.